There is no Monday after quite like the Monday after a college football playoff game. And Tim May and I, Tim May, the 41-year vet on the other side of your screen, and myself, Spencer Holbrook, are here to break down Ohio State 42, Tennessee 17. Still feels pretty surreal, Tim, that actually happened in the Horseshoe on Saturday night in front of all those Vol fans leaving in the middle of the third quarter. So let's talk about it. We're not going to spend too much time on Ohio State, Tennessee, only because we have to spin it forward because the Buckeyes are not done. They're going to play Oregon in the Rose Bowl. We're going to give our first thoughts on the Rose Bowl. We'll do 10 minutes or so on Tennessee, and then we'll get on to first thoughts on that Rose Bowl rematch between Ohio State and Oregon. I don't have the rose in my mouth this time, Tim, but how are you doing? And what are your first thoughts after rewatching Ohio State, Tennessee?
My first thought was I should have quipped you on when you had the rose stem in your mouth on Saturday night is, oh man, I hope you don't bite into one of the thorns on there. Number two, my next thought is Rocky Top could have turned into Rocky Road. The old song Rocky Top, Rocky Road, you'll always be a nightmare to me. Good old Rocky Road, Ohio Stadium. Something like that. I'd have to work on the lyrics. But, Ohio State turned Rocky Top into a Rocky Road for the Volunteers. They were leaving early. How many thousands were there, which in mythical, I think I saw one site that had 250,000 there, at one point, where people were taking it and running with it. But, I kind of feel for the fans, for their fans, because obviously their fans are as loyal as Ohio State fans are, maybe a little bit over the top in some form or fashion. But Ohio State grabbed this game from the get-go with a touchdown drive capped by one of the prettiest touchdown passes you're ever going to see, Will Howard to Jeremiah Smith. And it was Katie bar the door at that point. By the time Tennessee finally got going, it was 21-0. And that's the way you start any kind of game, much less a college football playoff game, leave no doubt. And Tennessee cut it to 10 by the end of the first half and had the ball to begin the second half. And that's where Ohio State really dropped the hammer with the stop of Tennessee on its first possession of the third quarter, and then Ohio State taking the ball again and driving for a touchdown. That's the way you leave no doubt. And the theme that Ryan Day and the team started this season with finally came to fruition. A very talented football team, leave no doubt, no matter who you're playing. So check mark number one on what could be a 4 check mark postseason for the Buckeyes.
Absolutely. My first thought was just, man, Donovan Jackson and Josh Fryer. Man, you want to talk about a performance.
Yes.
I was impressed with Luke Montgomery. I was impressed with Austin Sarabelt. I thought the second half of the game, Tegra Shabola really came into his own and played really well. I think all three of those guys have a lot of positive momentum heading into the Rose Bowl against Oregon, where they're going to have to face the best defensive tackles that they've seen since the Michigan game. I think Michigan and Oregon are just different there in the interior. But but more importantly for me, the way that Donovan Jackson and Josh Fryer blocked the Tennessee defensive ends that were so vaunted coming into this game, it was a question of, can Ohio State even block these guys? And it turned into, can James Pierce even record a statistic? I can't say enough good about Donovan Jackson. And, Josh Fryer too. I think his pressure came on the play where he hurt his ankle. So, even he didn't allow a pressure except for the one play where he rolled his ankle. So, they were so good, Tim.
Yes.
And if Ohio State gets this version of Donovan Jackson and Josh Fryer for 3 more games, they're going to win the national championship.
Well, hey, let me interrupt you though. Josh Fryer actually played well against Oregon. I mean, he had a hell of a game. And Josh Simmons was starting to have a hell of a game before he was lost for the season with that knee injury. But Oregon didn't have Jordan Birch that day. Jordan Birch we'll talk about that in a minute. But the bottom line was, Josh Fryer is I think one of the more underrated dudes on this entire football team on what he has given you from week to week. I don't know if you agree, but from what I've seen, and definitely on Saturday night, they dominated their spots. Agreed?
Yeah, I mean, it was as thorough that you're going to get on the offensive line from Ohio State. Obviously, Josh Simmons and Seth McLaughlin would have done a bang up job. They've been great all year.
Oh
They
yeah,
were great all year before they got hurt. But like for what Ohio State is on the offensive line right now, and to be honest, for what it isn't, that was as thorough and dominant of a performance from the offensive line as you're going to see.
yeah,
They pounded the ball into the end zone from the 1 yard line. They got tough yardage when they needed to. They opened holes for a creative running game. And Tim, remember, I'm not patting myself on the back here. I'm just kind of thinking back to what our priors were on this game. I said it wasn't the aggression that needed to be there for Chip Kelly and Ryan Day. It was creativity.
right.
Don't mistake creativity for aggression. The run game wasn't aggressive. It was creative. And that allowed Ohio State to be aggressive.
Correct.
The entire plan to run the football, the way that they ran the football behind this offensive line, the way Luke Montgomery came into his own, you might have seen a star born on Saturday night with that pancake block on the Travion Henderson.
He was
touchdown.
going 100 miles an hour most of the night.
And I'll let you loose here, Tim. I'll take the leash off of you.
I'm sorry.
No, I'll take the leash off of you for a second, but I'm going to set you up here.
People say we don't like each other, but that's just because I keep butting in, and that's one of my problems in life. Go ahead now.
I think it's why people watch this show, though, because we feed off of each other, whether it's interrupting or not. We feed off of each other. But anyway, as you like to say, for want of another term, Luke Montgomery did exactly what Ryan Day asked him to do, in a sense of rock people off the ball and make aggressive mistakes. If you're going to make a mistake, do it swinging.
Yeah.
This offensive line was aggressive. It was attacking. It was physical. It wasn't perfect. It's not going to be perfect. They're missing the Remington Trophy winner and a first-round pick at left tackle. It's not going to be perfect.
Hey, let me interrupt you right there, okay? Just one quick point. You got what you got now. People can keep looking in the rearview mirror and see who's missing and keep lamenting that. But the bottom line is that has nothing to do with what's coming. This is Ohio State's offensive line now. You know what I mean? And it's kind of like you're on a trip. This is what you've got left in your wallet. What you've spent. You're not going to get any more. There's no ATM. This is what you got to deal with. And so people can keep talking about how much better the line could be all they want, but it does no good at this point because those guys aren't coming back. And I thought that was the statement that was made more than anything. I'm glad you brought it up. Was the offensive line. It made a few mistakes in that game, absolutely. But the way it played, the level at which it played against a vaunted, supposedly maybe the best defensive line in the Southeastern Conference, was, quite laudable and quite impressive.
Yeah, I mean, I cannot say enough about this offensive line because for all the questions we had about it coming into this game, can they block a first-round pick at defensive end? Can they control the defensive tackles from Tennessee?
Yeah, big guys.
Be real honest with you. Those Tennessee defensive linemen, especially, not the entire roster. This isn't a blanket statement on the Vols, although blanket is kind of an apt word here. The Tennessee defensive linemen, they look cold, Tim. I'm not going to they did. And Ohio State's offensive line took advantage of it.
Yeah.
And so.
Don't hit me there. That hurts.
They've got bigger challenges ahead.
But
this offensive line is the first sticking point that we have to talk about. The second thing that we need to talk about, I already brushed on Travion Henderson. We don't need to continue to talk about that. We've got a lot to talk about before the Rose Bowl. And we'll get to a lot of these things about what happened against Tennessee, and it'll get sprinkled into the preview.
We gushed about Travion and Will Howard and Jeremiah Smith and everybody, the weapons on Saturday night as we stood there in that cold, but it didn't seem that cold to me, but I don't know why I went on that tangent or that divergent, but back to what you said. I mean, the guys in the trenches are the ones who deserve the praise from this one because they had to stand up against maybe the second best team in the SEC, definitely the third best team in the SEC, according to the playoff committee, and got the job done, man. I mean, they dominated.
Yeah. I mean, it was ultra impressive. I could not be more impressed with what the Buckeyes did. Just pure domination program wide over Tennessee. And I think that it was on full display. So that was my first talking point that we needed to get out, was just the way that this offensive line controlled the balls and allowed Ohio State to run its game plan. Because you can have a great creative game plan, and Ohio State did, but that does not matter if you can't block.
Right.
So,
and when you pitch and catch, you got to catch it. And Ohio State has some good catchers.
It's good. Jeremiah Smith is a good catcher. I agree.
Yeah, he's a pretty good catcher.
All right.
I play him at shortstop.
So again, we already gushed about the receivers. I thought Emeka Egbuka was fantastic on the rewatch. He was even more impactful on the rewatch than I think he was in game. Jeremiah Smith, unbelievable. We've written about him a lot at LettermenRow.com in the aftermath of this. We've talked about him. Go back, listen to like you said, Tim, our freezing post game, 1:00 in the morning. We talk about Jeremiah Smith a lot. The guy I did want to highlight before we move on to the defense and then go to Oregon is we're not going to Oregon, but move on to Oregon. Two guys I wanted to highlight. G. Scott Jr. I've been critical of him at times for his blocking. I thought he was good in the blocking game. Especially because like I said, I've been critical at times of his blocking. He was really good on Saturday night. Avid blocker. He was not afraid of contact. He was good running his feet, moving Tennessee defensive linemen. Another reason why I say that Tennessee looked cold. They just seemed to get pushed back a little easier as time went on. He caught a 7-yard pass in the second quarter. He caught an 8-yard pass on a 2nd and 10 to give Ohio State a really manageable 3rd and 2 on that first drive of the second half, which I thought was big.
Yeah.
Just keeping the chains moving, getting Ohio State out to midfield with that 8-yard catch. And then also on that drive, you had a 2nd and 8, gives Ohio State a big gain on 26 yards across the, down the sideline, but it was on a break in and then break back out route.
Right.
Really strong route from him. He's showing that receiving ability. There, again, just to reiterate, there are times where I have not been overly impressed with G. Scott. And I think he played really, really well against Tennessee. And I think it means really good things if he and Will Kazmarek can get back to the way they were playing the first 6 games of the year before Kaz got hurt.
Well, that's the point I was going to make.
Yeah.
On one of Quinshon Judkins' touchdowns, I get them all mixed up in my head. Ohio State scored so many touchdowns the other night. Isn't it funny how many points they scored compared to it seemed like the offense was on the denouement, whatever you want to call it, the slide at the end of the year from just producing points. And then they score 42 on the mighty SEC powerhouse, Tennessee. I don't think Tennessee's quite there yet, but that's a story for another day. When they had 4 tight ends on the field, including Patrick Gerd, at fullback. And that was a tour de force for the tight end room because 4 of them were on the field at the same time and delivered, a huge touchdown in a first-round playoff game. So that just tells you how almost full circle the tight end room has come with Kazmarek, when he returned and stuff. But that's how much they leaned on him. And that's kind of what you expected to see, little wrinkles like that from Chip Kelly all year long. But then you would lose a guy here and you'd lose a guy there. And suddenly, you weren't quite the offense you envisioned maybe in August. You understand what I'm saying from a formational standpoint? And they touched on a lot of things on Saturday night that we really hadn't seen the last part of the season, in my opinion. And it gave Tennessee problems, in my opinion, just matching up.
Yeah, I mean, it was, again, they used all their matchups to their advantage.
Yeah, they did.
Let's touch on the defense real quick. Man, Tim, Caleb Downs is so good that it has clouded our judgment all year. And I think you know where we're going with this. Lathan Ransom, man.
Oh yeah, I thought I was hoping that was where you were going.
I mean, it's one play, but it really shows you how good he is, how explosive he is. 3rd and 8, Tennessee's opening possession of the second half.
Accurate he is.
Tennessee's opening possession on the second half. Speed option. Honestly, I thought it was a good play call.
Yeah, I do.
But
until this blur came into my vision.
I mean, how are you supposed to go against that? You set up the pitch really well. Nico uses a good fake and gets it out on the edge, and it's still a blown up play because Lathan's just shot out of a cannon. Like, man, he's good.
Yeah. That's what I'm talking about, the accuracy with which, and Caleb Downs is the same guy. The accuracy when that recognition, clicks off in their head, the accuracy and the confidence with which both of those guys attack the run, especially on the edges. We've seen Caleb Downs make similar plays like that. We've seen Lathan Ransom make similar plays like that all year, but it's still cool to watch. And I mentioned that on many times on the radio pregame show and other things. The last couple of several games is when you throw Jordan Hancock into the mix, the confidence with which he comes and supports the run is the same thing. It's hard to get three safeties playing at that level with that kind of accuracy when they trigger. Not just the fact that they trigger, but they trigger accurately and open field, man. I hope people appreciate what that means. If you've ever stood on a football field and really seen it from that perspective of how wide open a space it truly is, and you're able to get a guy who's deciding which way he's going to go and just make little subtle moves which zero in on him like a heat-seeking missile. Yeah, it's laudable. Maybe I gushed there a little 5 seconds too much, but it's laudable. You don't see combinations of safeties like Ohio State's got on a lot of college football teams.
Yeah, and then the last thing that I wanted to talk about with this defense, I know that we're kind of going through this quickly, but again, I want to get our first thoughts out there on Ohio State, Oregon, because we've written so much at lettermenrow.com. You can go get all of that coverage. I think for $1 right now until the Rose Bowl, so that's a good deal. Davison Igbinosun, I thought played really well, Tim.
He got robbed.
Yeah, I mean, he had an interception. He seemed to be in the right place at the right time. He wasn't overly aggressive. He wasn't overly physical with the receivers. I know that this isn't the most physical Tennessee receiving group, and I think Oregon's is much more physical and much more aggressive in attacking, but it's a really good first step for Davison Igbinosun here in the playoffs. They need him really badly in this 12-team format. And Oregon is going to be the stiffest test because if they get past Oregon has better receivers than Texas. If they get past Texas or Arizona State, I guess, who's now missing their best receiver, they get past Texas or Arizona State and get to the national championship game, it's either Boise State, who you stop the run, Penn State, and those receivers don't scare you at all. I have a lot of respect for Penn State as an offense, but the receivers don't scare you.
Yeah, we've seen that show.
Exactly. And then Notre Dame, who runs the you-know-what out of the ball, but its receivers, but its receivers are not, on the Oregon level.
Yeah, and their quarterback isn't on a Dylan Gabriel level as far as throwing the ball.
So I'm just impressed with Davison Igbinosun, his first step in the CFP. Like, this was a really good litmus test for him. He passed. Now go play well against Oregon. And it only strictly from a cornerback standpoint, it gets easier if you get past Oregon. So play your best against Oregon, and it's downhill from there if you're a corner. So
hey, by the way, we'll get to see what players we get on the 27th and 28th, but clearly on the 30th, I'm taking dibs on going over and speaking with Denzel Burke. When we get all the players, or at least the ones in the two deep, because that, I think you were probably about to bring him up, right? But you talk about a redemption tour. Okay, Ohio State's kind of on one right now. It's already made amends about the beating a Southeastern Conference team in the playoffs again. By the way, they did beat Alabama in the first ever college football playoff. But the Denzel Burke story, I think, is going to be interesting headed into this one and in how it unfolds, right?
Yeah, it's cool, that they get this second opportunity. And one real quick, Tim, because I want to get to Oregon before we get out of here.
Did you see my note I just sent you, by the way?
Yes.
Okay,
go ahead. We got a little bit of time. There's a couple guys that I want to shout out just because this game was a team effort. Lorenzo Styles Jr. played one snap on defense. He was lined up out in the slot. They ran a slot fade against him. He had a pass breakup. Bryce West, freshman corner, deep go ball against a 5-star quarterback because Nico was still in there at the time.
Yeah.
Deep ball. Bryce West out of position, recovers, turns his head, breaks up the pass. Aaron Scott Jr. down in the end zone. I know they end up scoring a touchdown on this drive, but down in the end zone. He's in the right position. Ball probably still could have been caught. It was a perfect ball. I was right there. But Aaron Scott Jr. affects the sight of the receiver, doesn't get too handsy down the field, breaks the pass.
Yep.
Those don't mean a lot in a 42-17 game in the fourth quarter, but Lorenzo Styles Jr. has a chance to be on the field at times against Oregon. Aaron Scott and Bryce West are the future of this secondary. That's good confidence for them in the college football playoff. So, I'm just – those last three things I just wanted to make sure to shout out. Like, each of those three guys had a late-game pass breakup. Doesn't mean a lot against Oregon because I don't think Bryce West, Aaron Scott are going to play in the Rose Bowl. But I think it's huge for the future because you got an opportunity to get a lot of young guys playing time in a college football playoff game.
Yeah.
And that means a lot for confidence moving into 2025 when you're going to lose 25 guys off this roster.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about Oregon, Tim.
Wait. One more quickie on that. Boy, if you could have had that tag, will Lincoln Keno's play in the first round of the college football playoff for Ohio State? Yes, he did. They emptied the bench, so to speak, on the quarterback side of things. Poor Julian saying, I know he would like to have that one pass to, because I was already on the, down on the field then, and you were too, to the flat that just fell flat. I think that quelled some of the Julian saying buzz, for want of another term. But Ohio State got all four of his quarterbacks in the game. And that, they've got you probably won't have that shot against Oregon. We'll see. But it is so important. That's why it was interesting to me, puzzling to me a little bit, that they still had Will Howard in the game. And he even ran the ball, 3 times on what turned out to be his final series. But I would have thought, considering they're possibly playing 4 straight games, you would have gotten him out sooner rather than later. And I really didn't understand that kind of thinking. But, we can ask Ryan Day about that down the road. But it is so part and parcel. I think Ohio State came out of that game very healthy compared to what Tennessee limped out with, right? I mean, I don't remember seeing anybody go down with anything debilitating. I haven't heard of anything debilitating. Have you in the last day? I have not heard of that. So, knock on wood, they got through the first round A-OK.
Yeah, it's just standard bumps and bruises, but I mean those will heal before the Rose Bowl, so you're fine there. Let's talk about that Rose Bowl, Tim. First thoughts: Ohio State, Oregon. It's going to be incredible. Obviously, an incredible setting. We're very excited to get out there for the Rose Bowl. I'm intrigued by obviously the corners versus Oregon's wide receivers. I'm intrigued by the offensive line versus Oregon's defensive line. I'm intrigued by Will Howard against the narrative that he messed up the Oregon game. I'm intrigued by Ryan Day, trying to secure a second straight big win after being doubted they can't win big games. Juicy storylines at every turn, Tim. Yep. What are you most looking forward to in the build-up to Ohio State, Oregon?
Probably the secondary, having to deal with a fleet of good receivers, including Tez Johnson and that whole group, but also keeping an eye somehow on a quarterback that can beat you with his feet, and Dillon Gabriel. Ohio State, I'm probably going to write a little something about that. I mean, Ohio State, clearly quarterbacks who can run have been a bugaboo for the Ohio State defense all year, including Dillon Gabriel, who I keep reminding people probably the most impressive play he had in that first game was when he kept the ball and ran 27 yards, I think untouched, but pretty close to untouched for a backbreaker. That was a backbreaker touchdown. That's one you can't give up if you follow my drift, because you've shut down pretty much, not shut down, but throttled pretty much the rest of their offense to a certain extent, kept it at least, in control. And then he goes and it wasn't down the sidelines. It was down the hash marks for a touchdown. You can't give up something like that. And Ohio State has had trouble keeping its eye on running quarterbacks. We saw Northwestern get its only touchdown with a quarterback who, Northwestern scouted Ohio State and saw that they sometimes turn a blind eye to the quarterback. So that's an intriguing matchup. How do they keep an eye on Dylan Gabriel, but also cover these other weapons, including Oregon's talented running back, James? What's his name?
Jordan James.
Yeah. Jordan James, how do they keep an eye on him and everything else? So, yeah, it's just because I think Ohio State's going to score on Oregon. I watched them do it. I watched them have a couple of opportunities they blew in that game to score. I watched them give away 2 possessions, and still be in the game at the end. The onside kick, and then the what's the other one I'm thinking of? The drop snap by Will Howard, and then they when they were coming off the goal line after that great goal line stand, the drop snap by Will Howard, which kind of thwarted or stunted that drive. I mean, the ability to move the ball against Oregon is going to be there, and I think in even better fashion because, like I said, Ohio State's offensive line is what it is now, and looked really good against Tennessee, in my opinion. And Oregon is definitely a step up, maybe just all the way around defensively. But Ohio State moved the ball on Oregon the last time, right? Well, I threw for 300-something yards, and had it not been for the way that thing finished, the offensive pass interference call, which they really didn't recover from on that drive, it'd be interesting to see what Ohio State be favored by now. But they're still favored by 1.5 as we speak. 2, it's gone up, and a lot of that, like I pointed out to people on the radio, one of the radio shows I was on this morning, a lot of that's the fact that Ohio State fans suddenly are fired up. So, you bet the line up, you bet the line down, right?
Yeah, I think the thing that I'm most curious about is obviously the corners, obviously, the way that this defense has evolved. Tim, I don't know if you know this, and I didn't realize this, and some random person posted it on Twitter or X or whatever you call it. And I apologize because I don't have the credit to give because I didn't write down.
You haven't researched it? Go ahead.
I don't have the credit to give because I don't remember. I didn't write it down. Somebody pointed out that, do you know the last time Ohio State gave up a passing touchdown, Tim?
Wait, if you gave me 5 minutes, I could figure it out in my head. It wasn't against Tennessee. It wasn't against Michigan. It wasn't against Indiana, was it?
No.
It wasn't against Northwestern. It wasn't against I'm going to go through the whole list.
Penn State. Nope.
Penn State. It wasn't against Purdue because they gave up 0.
It wasn't against.
Was it against Oregon?
It was October 12th against Oregon.
Yeah.
Wow. They haven't given up a passing touchdown since they made the adjustments to the defense.
That's pretty impressive.
Because the pass rush is more effective right now because of the creativity of Jim Knowles. The secondary is playing better because of the pass rush. Coverage and rush are working together.
Of course, they're playing different in the secondary than they tried to do against Oregon. Go ahead.
Coverage and rush is working together at a better clip than at any point so far in the Jim Knowles era at Ohio State. And I'm comfortable saying that.
Yeah. Plus, they haven't faced an offense as potent as Oregon's since then either.
That's the caveat here, Tim.
That is the caveat.
They have not played a team that can push the ball down the field like Oregon does. But I still think it's worth noting that this defense is playing with a lot of confidence. But that's not even the biggest thing that I'm looking for, Tim. I just wanted to throw that stat out there, too.
That was interesting. That was interesting stat.
Chip Kelly and Ryan Day in the last 3 weeks were forced, after the Michigan game, they were forced to get creative. Against Oregon, they had a good game plan. They used Emeka Egbuka out of the backfield. They used a lot of empty because that's what you do against the Dan Lanning defense and like Kirby Smart defenses. If you watch the Alabama-Georgia game, Alabama had so much success out of empty because it throws off the alignments of the Georgia defense.
Yep.
Dan Lanning runs the same kind of defense. Ryan Day knows that. If you watch Ohio State-Oregon round 1 a lot, there's a lot of empty sets in there from Ohio State.
Yep.
That's called creativity and understanding personnel. The last 3 weeks, though, Ohio State was forced to get creative because of its offensive line shortcomings. They get confidence on the offensive line, but that doesn't mean you just go away from the creativity that got you there with the offensive line. Right. I want to see how creative and the different wrinkles that Ohio State has for Oregon based on not only what they did against Oregon the first time and the wrinkles off of that, but what they just did against Tennessee in getting creative and helping the offensive line, how creative this offensive game plan is against Oregon. Because this is another one where, Ryan Day said, like, almost in de facto, like, what do we have to lose? Like, go out there and let it all hang out, like you like to say. Yep. It's the same thing against Oregon because it's win or go home. Like, I guess it's win and go home. Because
think about this about Oregon, the Oregon game. Will Kazmarek got hurt in the first half in that game when he landed funny and hurt his shoulder in that game. So he was missing basically the last 3 quarters of that game. He had the first real, if I remember correctly, because, there was a lot of offensive action in that game on both sides, but I think he had the first real dagger kind of like offensive play down the seam there where he made that catch and run but my point was they lost him for the game and for half the season after that hit or after that landing. They lost Josh, some people call me Jimmy Simmons, for the rest of the year in the first half of that game. They lost Tegra Shabola for the last part of the first half of that game, but he came back and played in the second half. And, Ohio State still moved the ball for the most part on Oregon. The shuffle on the offensive line had already begun. And so that's what I'm thinking is that Ohio State is close to 100% in terms of able-bodied personnel right now, as it's been since that Oregon game, when you watched what happened on the offensive line as the season went along. And that's what I'm curious about, because they still scored 31 on Oregon, and we're almost in position to score 34 and steal that game, until the end. And who knows, they might have gotten a touchdown if Jeremiah Smith hadn't been called for that offensive pass interference, which I thought, based on the angle that the guy who called it, which came from the middle of the field, was legitimate because of the way Jeremiah Smith's arms went up in the air and that guy fell backward. I don't think today they would call it, but who knows? But Ohio State was quite capable, even in the first matchup, of scoring in the mid to high 30s. And that was with losing those guys I just mentioned. So this is going to be an interesting matchup, man. Anybody thinks it's Oregon? I mean, I'll gush. I'll go way too long if I start going into that.
And it's going to be in what
consensus. Plus, you've seen Dylan Gabriel. You know how he can beat you with his feet. No excuse for him doing that in this game, except shame on you.
It's going to be awesome, Tim. And it's going to be in what the consensus is the greatest setting in college football, the Rose Bowl. Tim May, the 41-year vet, and I will both be out in Southern California for the Rose Bowl. We're going to have Christmas with the families first, though. Family comes first. Then we'll get out to sunny Southern California for the Rose Bowl game between Oregon and Ohio State, a rematch of Rose Bowls of yore, a rematch of October 12th. This is going to be really awesome. It's a Pac-12 Big Ten rivalry, except it's just a Big Ten bash out in Pasadena. Tim, thanks for joining me today. We'll be in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center at some point this week to talk to the Buckeyes. Then we'll be celebrating Christmas, and then we'll get to Pasadena. That's just Tim May. I'm just Spencer Holbrook. You guys are the audience that make all of this happen. We love you for that. Merry Christmas, everybody, if we don't talk to you before then, but we might be back to talk a little bit before then.
Merry Christmas and happy holidays.
There you go. Thanks for hanging out. Hit the like button. Subscribe to the YouTube channel and come join us at lettermenrow.com. We'll see you guys over there at lettermenrow.com. We'll see you back here shortly for another video about the Buckeyes as they pursue a national championship. Next stop, Pasadena.